on the one hand, yes, there should always be meaning behind what you're doing. You've got to always have a sort of why in your head as why you're doing this in the first place. But equally, I don't think it always has to be grandiose. I think composition is it's a very serious discipline for a lot of people, and I think it is equally valid to be writing something because it's playful, or because you're trying something out, or because you think it'd be funny, it's got like an inside joke, or you're doing it just because it's like essentially something to do. Like, this is why people do creative things generally. It's because it's something to do and it's fun.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of The Other Box. Crazy, 4 episodes. Woo, we're still going. This one features composer and performer and educator Anna Disley-Simpson, who is ridiculously accomplished. She's written for the BBC Singers, the EU Chamber Orchestra, she's toured Europe with the band New Order, and she's currently musician in residence at Radley College, teaching music tech. She makes really, really cool genre-defined music, which she calls too conventional for new music audiences and too unconventional for normal audiences. Obviously, this is super down my street, and I thought it was just super interesting. So we end up talking a little bit about this, a bit about elitism and classism in the field, and also about why being a woman complicates all of this even further. So I've linked Anna's portfolio in the description. I really enjoyed this interview, and I can't wait to hear what you guys make of it. Go and check her stuff out and enjoy the show. You recently tweeted that you existentialize over writing music which is too conventional for new music circles but too unconventional for normal audiences. Why do you describe your music in this way?
I think it comes from a lot of things. I think part of it is mainly an insecurity that's built up from possibly how the education system kind of treats composing and treats new music, and the fact that a lot of new music is really very intellectualized and, in my opinion, over-intellectualized in some ways, to the point where the more kind of complex and hyper-complex you can make your work, the more that's held as the pinnacle, as what you should hope to achieve. Which is kind of strange to me, because that almost alienates you more from kind of general public audiences that maybe don't have an academic music background. But in a lot of kind of new music circles, that's the thing that's celebrated. And I think that's a bit of a disconnect for me. Part of it might also be a kind of the areas that I particularly work in, which is a lot of vocal music and choral music, and I think when people hear contemporary choral music, they I don't know, maybe don't see that as very experimental, and maybe it's very like palatable, and that's somehow lesser than hyper complex instrumental music, for example.
So it's kind of about the format of it, the fact that it's just a choir, for example, which is quite traditional and has so many traditional like connotations with it, and so immediately people kind of think it's not experimental enough, or is that?
Absolutely, I think it's something that's built on kind of just centuries of traditionalism, and this kind of obsession with always having to produce something that's really like as avant-garde as possible, and not acknowledging that maybe there's actually strength in creating music for these kind of classical contexts that actually resonate with people that don't have that background, for example, or perhaps both, like appealing to both audiences is the ultimate goal. That would be amazing.
Do you think there's kind of like a classist element to it then? It kind of sounds like that's what you're implying, or is that a bit of an unfair kind of assertion?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I think the very notion of composing, you're required to have such a background that's really only available for not very many people, of being able to not just read notation but be able to do it yourself and to do it in a way that is universally read. And perhaps people make different music in other ways, for example using technology, or not using things like scores at all. So I think it is partly that, and I think sort of coming off of that point of notation, I think there's maybe too much onus put on the score itself, rather than what the end product is and what is ultimately what we're trying to achieve, which is the auditory aspect of it, how it sounds and how listeners experience what you're making, rather than looking at the score and being like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, let's analyse this. Which is great, it has its place, but I don't have a lot of interest in that, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can feel like a bad thing.
Yeah, I think when I was kind of composing in these spaces, I definitely felt like it could just be really elitist, like you were kind of in some kind of exclusive club, if you could get music which other people don't get, and so I think with my music I tried to push against that notion by either making music which was kind of broadly accessible but experimental within those boundaries, or if it was going to be really kind of avant-garde or whatever, that I kind of embraced the silliness of it and kind of didn't take it too seriously. So I guess I'm just wondering, what decisions are you making with your music that kind of push against this notion that you kind of are approaching?
Yeah, I think we have a similar approach in that sort of taking elements from both sides, in the fact of making it not alienating for the general audience by maybe including elements, whether that's a melody or a conventional chord pattern or whatever that sort of makes sense to people, something that they can latch onto. I think that can be really powerful. And then even if every other element within that piece of work is bonkers, if they have that kind of something to latch onto, it's why I like working so much with kind of multimedia, particularly visual stuff, because visual language, I think in general, is so much more easy for people to make sense of and to understand in a kind of creative, artistic way over sort of sounds. I think we're very quick to think, oh, this is a sound I'm not used to, I don't know how to make sense of this. So that's one way that I kind of approach it. And I think essentially it just comes down to not letting those kind of new music circle attitudes that are very traditionalist and esoteric, not letting those inform what I do, because I definitely did when I was studying. It's easy to do that, but instead just writing what you want to hear.
Yeah, fascinating. So you've kind of touched on this already, but maybe it's changed for you in recent years, but do you kind of find yourself kind of altering that ratio of conventional to unconventional depending on what audience you're going to have for a piece, or are you trying to avoid doing that now as much as you can?
I think to some extent yes, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's literally taking into account what ensemble you're writing for and what the context is going to be, and at the end of the day, I'm a working professional, and to make money sometimes, which is essential, you need to write a certain type of piece for a certain type of group, and that to be able to monetize that at all is incredible. And if that means kind of adapting, I don't think it's compromising my creative vision or whatever phrase you want to use. It's more just being flexible and taking into account those performers and those audiences that they're not always going to be the same.
Does it affect your confidence, I guess? Because I know it affected my confidence a lot when I was especially when I kind of started out and I was trying to show my music to my parents, who were like, yeah, it's great, but you could tell that they were like, what are you spending your time doing? And then equally you'd show it to your tutor, who was like, yeah, it's great, but it's kind of a bit close to Katy Perry, or it's like it's a difficult kind of thing to navigate. I'm just wondering whether you still struggle with it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's slightly different now that I'm kind of out of education. I think when you're in that bubble, it can feel really like, oh, do they like what I'm making? And you really feel like maybe I have to pander to that, but then that feels disingenuous or whatever. It's definitely something I still struggle with. I think ultimately, if there's no audience for what you're doing, then that sucks. So you want there to be an audience, and an audience that appreciates and sees value in it. I think everyone struggles with that. I think it's less to do with the stuff I'm making itself nowadays. It's more to do with navigating kind of being an emerging composer, someone who's quite young as an artist, and particularly sometimes it's to do with being a woman as well, is being taken seriously, essentially. So regardless of what I'm making, just being the role itself being taken seriously. And I think, yeah, as I said, part of that is being young, and part of that is being a woman, and it's to do with what we think of as what a composer looks like, or what an artist is meant to look like. And I see it more now in my job. I'm a teacher, but my role is kind of like almost like an artist in residence at the school that I teach at as well. So it's interesting seeing how I'm treated. It's a boys' school as well, I should add.
Right.
How
okay.
I'm, yeah.
Job.
Yeah, exactly. It's been interesting to see how my professional creative life and myself is treated compared to my male counterparts that have the same kind of standing as I do, on the same salary, and have been there the same amount of time. And it's really interesting to see, to navigate that a little bit.
Yeah. Do you have to take any kind of specific compositional steps when you're writing music to make sure that it's taken seriously, while kind of making it as accessible as you can, and while kind of ensuring that you're keeping the audience that you like to keep? Like, specifically, what does that music look like?
Yeah, I think it depends very much on how traditional we're talking. So in the school that I'm working in, there's a real big church music, liturgical tradition. So it's kind of bouncing off of that, and not kind of, I don't write sacred music really, because that wouldn't really be my thing. But kind of thinking, how can I make this so that they understand it a bit more? But I think more than just the content of the music itself, it's more feeling like I have to kind of be extra articulate and extra kind of headstrong in what I'm doing, in order to be taken as seriously as the boy in the room, you know. So
it actually has very little to do with the music itself, and it's more just about these extra musical factors.
I think so. It's a bit of both, but I think more often than not, if I'm extra articulate and convincing, then I don't have as much to worry about. But that can be very tiring, and that requires a lot of just putting aside like any insecurities that are really very much there, in order to achieve that, I suppose.
So I auditioned for the joint course last year at Manchester, and my uni interview went really, really well, and then I had my RNCM interview as a composer. Okay. And I essentially got like ripped into, because I mean, it wasn't that bad, it was fine, but I definitely at the time felt I was being ripped into for kind of writing music that was overly concerned with what people would think, I guess. So it was too connected to the audience.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it was a strange thing, and I definitely, actually, it was a big reason why I didn't choose to do the joint course in the end, was because of my audition experience. And I don't know whether they were just pushing me or whether it was kind of a test or whatever, because I did get a place, but I think definitely it felt like, as you said right at the beginning, there's this kind of importance placed on music which is more concerned with like the ego of the composer than what effect it's having on its audience, I guess.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what, whether there's something disappointing about music which caters to an audience rather than is made purely for the pleasure of the composer itself, but I guess you've kind of already answered that. I don't know, what do you think?
I suppose, considering the experiences of the audiences and even, considering the experience of the instrumentalists is not necessarily compromising anything. I think for me it definitely enriches it and is what it kind of is all about for me, is that sort of collaboration without being cheesy, like a collective experience, rather like the bit where I'm writing it is so like such a small part of the process. It might be really laborious or whatever, but that's not it. That's not like the end goal, and that's not really the most enjoyable part for me anyway. For me it's like constantly imagining what this could be like in a live setting, or if it's not live, in a just in an experiential way. Yeah, I think people do work like that. They do write stuff just because they simply just want to for themselves, but you have to question, I think, why do that if it's not about the kind of end product of hearing it and being able to kind of experience that alongside your peers and talk about it. And if you're just kind of thinking, oh, it's just something that I want to do and I don't care what anyone else thinks of that, it's kind of like power to you, absolutely, but I don't know, but maybe that's just a real people-pleasy way of working. But
yeah, well, I think that's, I mean, I agree with you, obviously. I always kind of, I'd even go so far as to say it's kind of a bit self-indulgent to only write music for yourself. For me, it was very much, there was always this kind of, not to sound like my music is like changing the world or anything like that, it always sounds really like douchey, but there was always kind of an extra musical purpose to whatever I was writing, and it was beyond the score, as you say. To what extent is your process about kind of that end result and about what it sounds like, and to what extent is there kind of like a bigger purpose to it?
Yeah, no, I think they're always, on the one hand, yes, there should always be meaning behind what you're doing. You've got to always have a sort of why in your head as why you're doing this in the first place. But equally, I don't think it always has to be grandiose. I think composition is it's a very serious discipline for a lot of people, and I think it is equally valid to be writing something because it's playful, or because you're trying something out, or because you think it'd be funny, it's got like an inside joke, or you're doing it just because it's like essentially something to do. Like, this is why people do creative things generally, it's because it's something to do and it's fun. Like, I think it's really easy to forget that, which seems crazy, but just doing it for like the pure reason that it's something to do is kind of takes the pressure off a little bit when the stakes aren't so high. I think is when, certainly when I work best, because if I feel like I have to be doing something to achieve a grandiose goal and encapsulate a really serious meaning, then I don't know where to start with that, really. I don't feel like I'm the right person to do that most of the time.
How do you kind of manage that when it's paired with this notion that you have to be even more serious and more grandiose and more kind of articulate because you're a woman doing what you do? And so, I mean, I guess I'm asking whether you ever feel like you have to avoid doing that kind of playful stuff and kind of seeing music for this just fun creative thing just because you feel like you have to take it extra seriously in order to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I don't know really. I think again it's not so much about the content, but it's as long as I feel like I can explain myself,
right,
and kind of get people to come along with me and to sort of get it. Usually the people that would be performing it they're the ones that I have to convince, mainly, might be commissioners or whatever. I think as long as I can do that, then it's kind of fine. And if they want something serious and I don't feel able to do that, then I'll say. But most of the time, they, it's a case of leaving it up to me, and if I'm in the mood for something playful, then I'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just kind of blown away by how... I mean, do you find that a lot of people agree with you? Do you talk to a lot of people in your circles that have the same attitude towards composition, or do you find that it's alienating just because you hold these opinions?
It depends. I think there's a lot of... It's almost like I don't really speak about it very much. So even just tweeting that original tweet, I wasn't kind of expecting for anyone to be like, oh my God, relatable. Like, I totally get this. So I think it's actually really valuable to talk about it, and to talk, it's almost a little bit to do with imposter syndrome and things like that I think a lot of artists generally will struggle with. It's probably more of a universal thing than we think, because maybe not enough people talk about it yet. It totally depends. Everyone come across all sorts of different composers. Some really gel with, some I don't, whether that's musically or just the attitudes. But I think generally it's just something we need to talk about more.
If you kind of take it to its logical conclusion, taking all of these outside external factors into account, do you think they'll eventually start affecting your music to be more conventional or less conventional, or a hybrid of both, or what do you think is going to happen?
I don't know. I think that's sort of difficult to measure in itself, because I think that can mean different things to different people. I think stylistically I'm just bound to evolve depending on what I sort of do next. But it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that working with vocal music is kind of my comfort zone, and that's what I feel most comfortable kind of experimenting with, and that's what feels most kind of authentic to what I do. Maybe I've always been a singer, so that kind of helps as well, that it's like my instrument. But I think how it might evolve is probably involving more and more, like I said, of the multimedia, and to be putting my music in kind of extra musical contexts, I think is something that is really exciting to me, because again it gives you a sort of purpose beyond just what you're solely doing. It's like that element of collaboration, and at the same time I think it is a kind of easier access point for general audiences to experience maybe more experimental music in the context of a piece of theatre or a piece of film or in an art gallery, rather than just like a standalone concert. I hope that answers that question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. I did have I've had a listen to some of your music online, and I'm just really excited to see kind of where things go.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I will link some of your stuff if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, and you. Good luck with the podcast. I'm really excited to see where it goes. Your website is just so sick. I think it's amazing.
Oh my god, you know what? I spend so much time.
You can tell, but it's worth it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll send you that